The listing on the folding table looked harmless, the kind of flimsy paper that usually disappeared into pockets and trash cans before the first gavel strike. A few smudged columns, a few blurry photos, a few lines of household leftovers from a life someone else had finished living. Lot 23, oak frame mirror. Lot 24, box of mixed tools. Lot 25, vintage bar cart. Lot 26, keyed case, contents unknown. The line that stopped George Maddox never should have existed. Lot 27, garden statue, widow's walk. There was no garden statue. The photo showed a black metal briefcase with a built-in combination lock, the kind used by people who carried documents they did not want lost, seen, or stolen. The caption under it had been typed in all caps and then corrected by hand with a pen, as if someone had tried to fix the mistake and then thought better of it. Widow's walk, a term from old coastal houses, a roof-lined platform where someone watched the sea for a ship that might not return. George read it twice, then again, and felt his throat tighten the way it did whenever his mind tried to reject a reality it did not want to hold. The room smelled of coffee, damp coats, and old furniture pulled from storage. The crowd murmured with that particular excitement that always accompanied other people's endings. Bargains, antiques, a chance to buy an entire story for less than it cost to repair one. The auction banner above the door read, "Estate Sale, R. Maddox, Saturday, 10 a.m. R. Maddox, Ryan Maddox." George's older brother had been dead for 11 days, an overdose in a downtown hotel, according to the coroner's summary and the polite tone of the police officer who delivered it, as if careful wording could soften the shape of the truth. No foul play, no suspects, a man with problems. George had not spoken to Ryan in nearly 8 years. Not since the night Ryan showed up at his house with a split lip and a bruise forming under one eye, refused to explain, and asked for $50,000 without a reason that made sense. Not since George refused. Not since Ryan left, shoulders squared, pride in front of pain, and never asked again. Now, Ryan's life was being sold off in a rented community hall 30 minutes from George's small house outside Cleveland. The sale was supposed to be simple. Show up, bid on what mattered, leave with a box of old photographs and maybe a shirt that still smelled like cedar and aftershave. A final gesture to a complicated relationship. And then there was the misprint. Widow's Walk. George found the table with the lot photos and studied the image again. The briefcase sat on a cheap folding chair, its handle scuffed, its surface scratched. An old red sticker on the corner, peeled halfway off like a tongue. The sticker read, "Harbor." The auction clerk behind the table noticed George lingering and offered a practiced smile. Mid-40s, tired eyes, hair pulled back tight. Her name tag read Mara. George's gaze stayed on the paper. Lot 27. The clerk's smile held steady, then faltered just a fraction. A flicker, a warning, a recognition. George understood something without language. Someone had placed that word there on purpose. The auctioneer's microphone popped. The crowd leaned forward. The first lot rolled. A wooden dining set, a lamp, a stack of paperback thrillers. Numbers rose and fell. People laughed, competed, won. George stayed near the back, close enough to see the clerk's hands whenever she touched the paperwork. When Lot 26 came up, the keyed case, the gavel paused for the expected theatrics. Keyed case, contents unknown. Who wants a mystery today? A few hands went up. A young couple in matching jackets. A man in a cap with a contractor logo. Someone else, older, with a grin and too much confidence. The price climbed quickly. Everyone loved a mystery until it became expensive. George did not raise his hand. When Lot 27 rolled forward on a dolly, the room changed. The black metal briefcase looked heavier in real life than in the photo. Its latches shone under fluorescent light, a quiet thing that did not belong among lamps and chairs. The auctioneer read the line. Garden statue, widow's walk. A ripple of confused laughter. Someone called out that it was a suitcase. Another voice corrected it as a briefcase. The auctioneer shrugged and made a joke about modern garden decor. The crowd laughed again. George watched Mara. The clerk did not laugh. The bidding started. George waited until the room's enthusiasm collapsed under uncertainty. People wanted easy value, not locked secrets that might turn into trouble. The price rose, then stalled. George raised his bidder card. The gavel dropped. Lot 27 went to George for $240. Mara wrote the number down slowly, then slid the receipt across with the kind of care normally reserved for fragile glass. Her eyes stayed on the word as her pen hovered. Then she crossed something out on her internal list. George did not move. Mara looked up. The room noise faded behind the sound of George's heartbeat. Her lips formed a single sentence without sound. Not here. George took the receipt and carried the briefcase out, steady as a man carrying groceries, while his mind sprinted in circles. The parking lot air cut cold and clean. He loaded the case into his truck and drove home with both hands tight on the wheel, the briefcase in the passenger seat like a silent passenger. The word stayed with him all the way. Widow's walk. At home, George set the case on his kitchen table and stared at it as if it might open itself out of pity. The lock was a 3-number dial. Old-fashioned, stubborn, designed for patience. George tried the first combination that came to mind. Ryan's birthday. Nothing. Then the year Ryan graduated. Nothing. Then the only number George could not forget, even if age stripped the rest away, 0614, the day George's wife died. 4 digits for a 3-dial lock, useless. Nothing. He sat back and let the house settle around him. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked. The silence was familiar, a steady companion since grief made everything else leave. On the counter, Ryan's estate paperwork lay in a neat pile. A police report, a coroner's summary, a hotel invoice, a list of personal effects returned, wallet, phone, keys, phone. George's stomach tightened. Ryan's phone was in a clear evidence bag on the counter, the screen dark, the battery dead. George had kept it there, untouched, the way people kept relics when they did not know what to do with them. The phone felt like a boundary. Crossing it meant accepting that the relationship ended with unanswered questions. George plugged it into a charger. The screen blinked. The phone powered on. Passcode required. Ryan had never been subtle about security. His passcodes were always built from words turned into numbers, patterns, private jokes. George tried a guess. Failed, another, failed, a third, locked for 2 minutes. The briefcase sat on the table, black and patient. The misprint sat in George's mind, bright and sharp. Widow's walk. George searched the term on his laptop instead, hands stiff, eyes dry. A rooftop platform. A place for waiting. A place for watching. A place for grief. Then another result, buried lower. Widow's Walk, 2019 fundraising gala theme, Harbor Light Children's Foundation. Harbor Light. Harbor. The sticker on the briefcase. George opened a new tab and searched Harbor Light Children's Foundation. He had seen the name before, vague and glossy in charity ads, always tied to smiling photos, always tied to wealthy donors. A foundation that raised money for pediatric care and community resilience. The website was polished enough to look inevitable. A board list, photos of galas, a yearly report PDF, a donation button that popped up like a friendly demand, the board chair, Celeste Armitage. The name punched a memory out of hiding. Celeste Armitage had been in George's life once, indirectly, like a comet that passed close and left an afterburn. She was the woman Ryan worked for, the woman who hosted the city's biggest charity events, the woman who could make a room of powerful people turn their heads in the same direction with a smile. Ryan's last Christmas card 8 years ago had included a photo. Ryan in a suit that did not quite fit, a ballroom behind him, Celeste beside him, hand on his shoulder like ownership. Caption: proud of my new role with Harbor Light. George had thrown that card away in anger and then regretted it in the quiet. Now a briefcase with a harbor sticker sat on George's table. Now the words Widow's Walk pointed to a foundation gala theme. George reached for the estate papers again and looked at the basic information like a man reading a map too late. Cause of death: acute intoxication. No listed substances on the summary page, only a note about pending lab confirmation. No police investigation beyond routine. No mention of a foundation. George's eyes fell on the hotel invoice. Harborview Hotel. The same word again. Harbor. George's hands went cold. A pattern formed with the slow inevitability of a storm line on the horizon. The next morning, George drove back to the community hall under the excuse of picking up a second lot he had not purchased. The auction staff were cleaning up. Folding chairs stacked. Tables wiped down. A few unsold items loaded into a van. Mara stood alone at the registration table, sorting paperwork into folders. George approached, receipt in hand. Her eyes lifted. Recognition again. George placed the receipt on the table, finger pointing to the misprinted line. Widow's Walk. Mara's gaze stayed on it too long to be innocent. George waited without speaking. Silence made other people fill it. Mara's fingers tapped once against the table edge, then stopped. A quiet confession formed in her posture before it formed in language. The printout had been typed from Ryan's inventory list. The inventory list had been sent electronically. The captions were supposed to match the photos, but one caption did not match. That meant the mismatch was the message. Mara reached into a folder and pulled out a second sheet, a back office sheet, less clean than the public listing. On it, the lot was labeled differently. Lot 27. Widow's Walk. Do not sell early. Confirm buyer. George looked at the note scrawled in the margin. GM only. 2 letters. Not enough for clarity, enough for a lock. George Maddox, or something else. Mara's eyes stayed on George's face. A decision made itself there. She slid a small business card across the table. No name, only a number and a single printed line. South Shore Boxes, private storage. George's heart thumped. Storage, a locked case, a coded caption, a sticker, a foundation gala, a storage company. Mara's hand hovered over the card, then withdrew like a burned finger. A thin line between help and danger. George took the card, folded it into his pocket, and left without looking back. South Shore Boxes sat behind a strip mall and a closed diner, a low building with faded paint and security cameras on every corner. The office smelled like industrial cleaner and stale air freshener. A woman behind the counter glanced up from her screen with the tired distrust of someone who saw too many lies. George gave the card. The woman typed the number and scanned George's face. A slow smile that did not reach her eyes. A locked unit existed under the name R. Maddox. Past due by 9 days. Access restricted pending estate verification. George handed over the death certificate copy. More typing, more scanning. The woman's eyes flicked to a camera, then back. A unit number printed on a slip. 3D. A keypad code 1227. George's pulse jumped. 12/27. A date, a birthday, a hidden meaning. George walked down rows of metal doors until he found 3D. The padlock was heavy. The keypad blinked. He typed 1227. The lock clicked open. Inside was not a hoard of furniture or boxes. It was a small, clinical space. One folding table, one plastic tub, one file box, one laptop in a padded sleeve, one envelope sealed with tape, one manila folder labeled in Ryan's handwriting. Widow's Walk. Keep offline. George's fingers hovered over the folder, the air in the unit suddenly too thin. The folder opened with the dry rasp of paper that had been waiting. Bank statements, donation logs, gala invoices, vendor contracts, and spreadsheets that did not match the glossy annual report. Rows of money moving in loops, sponsorship fees, consulting payments, event security, transport, art handling. An art handling line repeated across years, always paid to the same shell company, Oak and Frame, LLC. Oak Frame, the mislabeled auction lot. The innocent-looking phrase now burned. Oak Frame was not a mirror. Oak Frame was a conduit. George turned the pages, seeing a separate column marked Return. Money left Harbor Light, went through Oak and Frame, returned as private consulting to individual names, council members, inspectors, permit officials, bribes packaged as philanthropy, a neat system, a clean lie. The envelope at the bottom of the tub was addressed to George Maddox in Ryan's handwriting. George's hands trembled as he peeled the tape and opened it. Inside was a short letter and a flash drive. The letter was written in block print, the kind used by people afraid of being recognized by their own handwriting. George, if you found this, it means the story got sold before the truth did. The auction list was the only place I could leave a signal without their filter. Widow's Walk equals the only thing Celeste fears. Watching eyes. Oak Frame equals the pipe. The case holds the rest. Do not trust local police. Do not go to them first. Find a reporter, then set a trap where they can't control the room. R. The flash drive felt warm in George's palm, as if it carried the heat of Ryan's last remaining will. The case. George remembered the black briefcase on his kitchen table. George drove home with the folder locked in his glove compartment and the flash drive in his pocket like a second heartbeat. At home, he inserted the drive into his laptop. A single folder appeared. Inside, audio files, scanned documents, and one video clip. George clicked the video. It showed Ryan in a hotel room, camera positioned low, the angle wide enough to include the door. Ryan paced, face gray, eyes sharp with fear. The audio caught fragments, threats, names, numbers, a deadline. Not a confession, not clean enough for court, but enough to show terror. Then a knock at the door. The clip cut to black. The next file was an audio recording labeled C. Armitage, 2:14 a.m. George played it. A woman's voice filled the speakers, calm and controlled, speaking as if the world existed to be arranged. A missing line in the spreadsheet. A donor who wanted reassurance. A reminder that loyalty paid well and betrayal paid worse. And then, in the middle of it, a sentence like a blade. The hotel problem needed to look like a personal failure, not a foundation issue. George's lungs locked. Hotel problem. Personal failure. Overdose. George sat back, the chair creaking under his weight, the room spinning slightly. Ryan had not died because he was weak. Ryan had died because he was dangerous. The next morning, George called the only person Ryan's letter instructed him to find: a reporter. Nina Park's name appeared after 3 searches and one local article about permit corruption in the county. She worked for a regional investigative outlet with national syndication. Her photo showed a woman in her 30s with tired eyes and a posture that looked like she expected lies and collected them anyway. George left a voicemail with one sentence that mattered: evidence of a charity laundering bribes, a death staged as an overdose, a flash drive, a named board chair. Nina returned the call within an hour. A meeting happened at a diner off the highway, a place with chipped mugs and booths that absorbed secrets. George brought the folder. Nina brought a small recorder and a calm expression that did not panic when the story turned sharp. The documents spread across the table. George watched Nina's eyes track patterns faster than his own. The same vendor names, the same bank routing numbers, the same return loops. Nina's expression tightened as the audio played. A foundation issue, a hotel problem, a personal failure. This was not a random tragedy. This was a cleanup. Nina's first question mattered more than anything else: chain of custody. George explained the auction misprint, the clerk, the storage unit, the letter, the flash drive. Nina's gaze held on the term widow's walk, then lifted. Someone inside the process helped Ryan place a breadcrumb. Someone expected George to be the person who followed it. Mara. George gave Nina the name. Nina nodded and began building the only thing that could stand against money: a timeline with receipts. Over the next week, Nina verified what the folder implied. Oak and Frame LLC existed. Its registered agent led to a mailbox service. Its payments matched the foundation's gala expenses. The return money landed in accounts held by officials tied to zoning, permits, and inspections. Celeste Armitage's husband sat on a judicial ethics committee. Her cousin ran a construction firm that won charity-sponsored contracts. Her brother, Lucas Armitage, chaired the County Development Commission. The system was not a single crime. It was a habitat. George watched Nina work, methodical and relentless, and felt something inside him loosen. Grief had made him soft. Anger made him sharp again. The trap began as a simple idea: put Celeste where she could not edit the room. Harbor Light's annual gala approached, announced in bright ads across the city. The theme, proudly printed in gold script: Widow's Walk, an ocean motif, a rooftop lounge at the Harborview Hotel, a live stream for donors who couldn't attend, a transparent night of giving. Perfect. Nina reached out, not as a beggar, but as a professional with leverage. The outlet would cover the gala as a human interest piece, a polite request for access, the kind of request organizations refused only when they had something to hide. Harbor Light accepted. A press pass arrived. George acquired a ticket using Ryan's estate paperwork. A legacy donor seat, purchased years earlier and never used. The foundation honored it as part of their image. An invitation to the rooftop. A seat in the room where the lie lived. The night of the gala, the Harborview Hotel glowed like a shrine to money. Valets lined up luxury cars. Guests moved in expensive fabric, smiling at each other like mirrors. George wore a suit he hadn't worn since his wife's funeral. The fabric felt foreign. His hands felt too old for the polished environment. He carried the black briefcase in a plain tote bag, hidden like contraband. Nina wore a dark blazer and a press badge. Her eyes scanned constantly, cataloging faces and exits. On the rooftop, the theme was everywhere. Nautical rope decor, lanterns, a mock widow's walk platform staged near the railing for photo ops. People posed there, laughing, pretending to watch for ships. George's stomach turned. A fundraiser built from a symbol of waiting for the dead. Celeste Armitage moved through the crowd like she owned the air. Mid-50s, elegant, composed, the kind of beauty that came from control and careful nutrition. Her smile was practiced and expensive. Her eyes were bright, sharp, and cold underneath. She approached George's table after the first speech, gliding between guests with the ease of a predator disguised as a hostess. A quick look at George, then the tote bag near his feet. Recognition sparked and vanished. George's pulse hammered. Nina's phone sat on the table, recording, placed like an idle habit. The live stream cameras panned the room, catching smiles and raised glasses. A server passed with champagne. George did not drink. Celeste paused beside the table, angled toward George with a smile meant for public view. A polite introduction followed, quick and clean, as if the words mattered less than the message embedded in them. Then Celeste's gaze dropped again, just once, to the tote bag. The gavel of reality fell in George's mind. Celeste knew the case existed. That knowledge was the trap's hinge. The evening moved toward its centerpiece, a donor spotlight segment where a few attendees were invited to stand on the widow's walk platform and speak about why they gave. Nina moved toward the camera crew under the excuse of capturing B-roll. Her press badge opened a lane. George waited until the platform segment began, until the crowd's attention focused forward, and the live stream director zoomed in on faces that smiled for money. Then George stood, carrying the tote bag. He walked toward the platform like a man walking toward a confession. A staff member moved to intercept, then hesitated at the legacy donor badge on George's lapel. George stepped onto the platform. The ocean wind hit his face. The city lights below shimmered like a separate universe. The crowd quieted, expecting a sentimental story. George opened the tote bag and placed the black briefcase on the rail ledge. The crowd shifted. Confusion spread. Celeste's smile froze at the edge. George reached into his inside pocket and pulled out Ryan's letter copy and one clean sheet Nina had prepared. A short summary of the financial loop, with names redacted except one. Oak and Frame, LLC. George lifted the paper toward the cameras, letting the live stream zoom catch it. The MC's posture tightened. Security began moving, slow at first, uncertain. George's throat tightened, but the words formed anyway, fueled by years of swallowed resentment and 11 days of fresh grief. A brother who died labeled as an overdose. A foundation that sold compassion while buying officials. A spreadsheet that told the truth without emotion. Nina's voice came through the press mic lane, calm and steady, feeding the broadcast the one detail needed to turn a story into a warrant. Federal investigators had already received copies. The question now was not whether there was evidence, but whether the guilty would reveal themselves in the open. Celeste stepped forward, smile returning too fast. An attempt at kindness, an attempt at control. The MC tried to laugh, tried to redirect, tried to treat the briefcase like a misunderstood prop. George lifted the case slightly, showing the harbor sticker. The live stream camera lingered. Celeste's composure cracked. A small correction slipped out, quick and reflexive, like a person correcting a lie before realizing it had been exposed. The case should have been in the back office, not up here. The words landed in the air like a glass shattering. Back office, not storage, not auction, not George's kitchen table. Back office, a place only staff and insiders accessed. The crowd murmured. Security surged forward. Nina moved closer, her phone pointed toward Celeste's face, capturing every twitch. Celeste's eyes narrowed, then widened in a flash of panic. Another correction spilled, faster now, trying to patch the first mistake. That case was tagged for the Willow Street branch. It was never supposed to leave. Willow Street branch. A location never spoken aloud by George, never printed on the paper, never mentioned by Nina. A detail known only by someone who knew where the case came from. The MC's smile collapsed. A security guard grabbed the tote bag. Another reached for the briefcase. George's hand stayed on it, steady. The wind carried the city's noise up to the rooftop. Sirens joined it, distant at first, then growing. Celeste turned toward the stairwell. A move that was too late. Men in plain clothes stepped onto the rooftop, badges flashing under the lantern light. The room's energy changed instantly. Money recognized authority when it had no choice. Celeste's face held a final version of composure, then failed. George watched her eyes flick to exits, to people, to options. No options remained. The agents moved with calm efficiency, separating staff, securing the platform, collecting the briefcase as evidence with gloves, as if it were already part of a crime scene, because it was. Nina's recorder caught the sound of handcuffs in the background, quiet and final. The live stream camera kept rolling for 13 more seconds before someone cut it. 13 seconds was long enough. Long enough for the world to see a charity queen exposed not by a reporter's headline, but by her own careless certainty. Afterward, the rooftop emptied in waves. Guests fled into elevators, leaving behind half-finished drinks and abandoned auction paddles used for donation games. George stood near the platform railing, looking out at the dark water beyond the city. The hotel's name glowed below like a cruel joke. Harborview. Ryan's last night. The agents collected statements. Nina provided copies. Mara, the clerk, appeared at the edge of the scene under escort, eyes down, hands shaking, and a weight lifted off her shoulders as if she had been holding the breath of a secret for years. Mara had worked at the auction company as a side job. Her main job had been in Harbor Light's event logistics. She had seen enough to know what happened to people who saw too much. Ryan had been one of the few who tried to do something anyway. The misprint had been Mara's contribution to Ryan's plan. One last chance to put the truth somewhere Celeste's people could not sanitize. A risk, a gamble, a widow's walk. Over the following weeks, the fallout hit like a storm. Warrants, seized records, frozen accounts, press conferences that used careful language to hide panic, donor statements that pretended shock. The federal case expanded beyond one foundation. Oak and Frame led to other shell companies, other charities, other officials. The narrative of Ryan's death shifted from personal failure to suspicious event. Toxicology was re-examined. Hotel key logs were pulled. Video footage, previously unavailable, appeared when federal subpoenas made it unhideable. A witness came forward. A hotel maintenance worker who remembered a woman in a silver dress leaving Ryan's floor at 2:17 a.m. A woman who smiled at him like he was furniture. Celeste Armitage. George did not attend every hearing. Age made travel harder. Grief made crowds harder. But he watched the parts that mattered. The moment the prosecutor described the financial loop on a projector screen. The moment the word conspiracy became official. The moment the judge ordered the foundation's board removed and appointed a receiver. The moment the assistant district attorney announced the reclassification, Ryan Maddox's death, under active homicide investigation. George visited Ryan's grave on a cold morning 2 months later, carrying a small bronze plaque. The headstone had been simple: a name, a date, a word, beloved. George placed the plaque at the base where grass struggled to grow. The plaque read, "Widow's Walk, Truth Returns," a private memorial to the clue that changed everything. The house remained quiet. The clock continued ticking. The emptiness did not disappear, but something shifted. A lie had been broken in public. A man who had been dismissed as an addict had been seen as a whistleblower. A brother who had been distant became a brother who mattered. George returned home and placed the black briefcase on the same kitchen table where it first sat. The case was empty now, its contents taken into evidence, but its shape remained. A reminder that endings could be rewritten when someone refused to accept the easy version. Outside, the wind moved through bare trees. The world continued, indifferent as always. Inside, George poured coffee into a mug and let the heat warm his hands. Waiting had been the theme of grief. Watching had been the theme of justice. The widow's walk belonged to him now, not as a place for mourning ships, but as a place where the truth could not be hidden behind lanterns and speeches. Ryan's message had survived the sale, and the people who believed money could edit everything learned, for once, that some rooms could not be controlled. Not when the cameras were live.